Huh? The Soviets demand an end to the Korean War in the UN. Well, okay, that's a new one. Is it just bluster, or do they actually say any terms? I see. Interesting. Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah. November 11th, 1951. During the peace talks recently and in August, the communist side was totally inflexible about a number of things. But this week, something different happens. This week, they make real concessions, but the UN side rejects them. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the Panmunjom peace talks continued, and the Kaesong situation continued to be the main sticking point, as they continued talking about a demarcation line for any truce. And in the field, the second battle for Maryang-san broke out. It comes to its end this week. On the 5th, elements of the Commonwealth Division try to recover the ground they lost last week to the Chinese. The attack fails, so Maryang-san remains in Chinese hands. So the Commonwealth forces will reinforce Little Gibraltar and the other high ground in the region that they hold. The Chinese will continue to shell the UN forces, and they do make one attempt to take more ground, which fails, but temperatures are dropping, and everyone is getting ready for the frozen Korean winter. And one way they are doing that is by trying to negotiate a truce to stop the fighting. The talks, though, seem like they might end in another deadlock like in August. But on the 6th, the communist side gives what looks to many like a big concession. They rescind their demands that the UN side give up Bloody and Heartbreak Ridges, the Punch Bowl, and other land in the Iron Triangle, and say they will accept the current battle lines as the final truce line, but only if the UN side agrees to that now, right now, before the other items on the agenda have been discussed or resolved, and before an armistice has been signed. The UN delegation rejects this. UN Commander Matt Ridgway tells Washington it's basically a ceasefire, and it would give the enemy security against UN military operations, while giving him all the time in the world to spend discussing the rest of the truce agenda, maybe years even. This was a possibility, or perhaps even a probability, but it was not an easy one for the public to grasp. Viewed cursorily or uncritically, the communists seemed to be offering what the UN delegation had sought for so many months, an end to the fighting, not at the 38th parallel as the communists had originally insisted, but on the existing battle line, which guaranteed the UN line Kansas. Considering the seeming uselessness of the stalemated war and the shocking American casualties in August, September, and October, the communist offer seemed more than reasonable, and the public could not understand why Ridgway rejected it and continued to insist on getting Kaesong and other petty concessions. Washington doesn't quite get it either. The Joint Chiefs cable Ridgway to point out that the whole time, the basic principle has been that the line be generally along the battle line, and now this is being accepted by the other side, and they'd rather let the enemy keep Kaesong if the only other option is having the whole truce talks break down. And who's going to calm the public should that happen? The public doesn't care about Kaesong. Ridgway vehemently disagrees with all of this and says that Kaesong has to still be on the table. When the sub-delegations met on the following day, General Hodes presented the UNC compromise offer. This accepted a 4-kilometer demarcation zone based on the actual line of contact at the time of the signing of the armistice with appropriate adjustments. 3 officers from each side would work out the battle line and would be prepared to give it to the delegation prior to the completion of the truce. In the meantime, the UNC proposal recommended that the conferees proceed to other items on the agenda. This leads to a hail of questions from the communist side, and they sour when they realize that the UN is still not totally ruling the possession of Kaesong out of any future adjustments to the line. So they insist that item 2 on the agenda, setting the line, must be settled now, before any other items can be discussed. They say postponing it until after an armistice is completely out of the question, and also agreeing on a line, in principle, is not enough. Henry Hodes says, but the present line will only be valid if they conclude an armistice quickly. It won't be valid if it takes a bunch of time. If that's the case, they'll have to agree to a new demarcation line that reflects changes to the battlefield. UN Chief Delegate Turner Joy does not think Washington should go for the current line being the absolute final one. Washington agrees, but with reservations. If the UNC delegation made a hard and fast stand on Keesong and the line of demarcation too long, it would appear to be a major concession when the UNC finally accepted the communist position. Public opinion at home would not understand a breakdown of negotiations over Keesong in the face of recent communist concessions. Therefore, if the communists flatly rejected the UNC proposal to postpone agreement on the line of demarcation, the enemy's line of contact in the Keesong area should be accepted quickly. To prevent the communists from making the line of demarcation permanent, they suggested to Ridgway that a time limit be set for the completion of the other agenda items. Yep, a time limit. So if no agreement is reached within that time, then the line would be revisited and subject to revision. So yeah, this would be like a de facto ceasefire during the time period set. And there would no doubt be extensions asked for to settle other agenda items. Do they really want a ceasefire while negotiations are active? Well, that's not going to be to the UN's advantage, in Ridgway's opinion. He also says if he has to give up Keesong, then he wants to be inflexible that the line of contact on the date of the armistice, wherever and whenever that may be the demarcation line. The Joint Chiefs do not want to go quite all that far. Sure, they want to press for a postponed acceptance of the line, but don't want to say that it's their final position. The communists have made concessions on the location of the line, and what if being inflexible now makes them revert all the way to calling for the 38th parallel to be the line? That would ruin everything. So an early agreement that satisfies the major UN requirements is what they should be after now. As for what's going on in the actual meetings, the communists basically ignore Hode's charge that they want the line settled so they can take their sweet time on other agenda items. But they also by today are being inflexible that the line be a 4-kilometer demilitarized zone based on line of contact with no adjustments now or later at all, right? It's confusing. I get it. So, let me make it more confusing. We need a wild card. On the 8th, in a speech before the UN General Assembly, Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Vyshinsky chastises the Western nations as per usual, but specifically speaks about Korea. He demands that the Korean War basically stop, that all nations involved stop military operations, withdraw to the 38th parallel within 10 days, and all foreign troops and foreign volunteer forces, remember that's what the Chinese officially are, all of those forces leave Korea within 3 months. The collective heads in Washington explode. Is this a signal to the communists to take back their offer and go back to their old stance that the 38th parallel be the line? Is this a signal to the West to accept the latest offer within 10 days, or else they'll demand the 38th parallel? Is this just standard bombast? Whatever it is, it does help influence at least American public opinion further. Today, the 11th, the New York Times asks why we're quibbling over a trifle like Keesong when we've already agreed on the big issues regarding a truce line. 22 men from the Departments of State and Defense plan to meet tomorrow the 12th to settle this once and for all. You know, last week I talked a bit about the evolution of thoughts concerning POWs and what to do with them should there be an armistice, voluntary or involuntary repatriation, man-for-man exchanges, or an all-for-all exchange. Well, I'll get more into that next week, but now I'd like to talk a bit about Geoje POW camp on Geoje Island, which is the largest UN prison camp. By this time, it is filled to bursting with Chinese and Koreans. It falls under the jurisdiction of the 2nd Logistical Command in Pusan, who deal with all the POWs as well as they can, and it seems, at least on the surface, that it's running pretty well. The POWs there work in workshops, making placards and flags and things like that. And each day, an American NCO makes the rounds of the compounds where some 80,000 captives live. He is accompanied by a couple of POW trustees. Food, clothing, and housing are apparently adequate, but with so many prisoners crammed into each compound, close inspection is impossible. POWs still disappeared or turned up dead. There still seemed to be dissension in the compounds, but none of the guards thought it was their business or of any great concern. In the absence of concern or pressure, the control of the camps tended to grow lackadaisical, and certain of the POWs tended to grow more arrogant. The command situation there has been weird, okay? From January, when it was set up, until September, when Colonel Maurice Fitzgerald took over, it had run through 8 commanders, pretty much one new one a month. So there's been a lot of uncertainty there. And there was some violence too between guards and prisoners. Prisoners throwing rocks at guards for being forced to dig latrine pits back in June were shot at and 3 were killed. In July and August, guards killed 8 more POWs, but that's not happening so much now. And we've started instead seeing murders every month of pro or anti-communist POWs by other anti or pro-communist POWs. In September, a self-appointed People's Court executed 15 prisoners. A riot in one compound took 3 lives, and troops had to rush in to restore order. 2nd Logistical Command has asked U.S. 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet for more security, and not just in numbers, but in the quality of the personnel assigned there. In October, the 8137th Military Police Group was activated, and on top of those 3 battalions, 4 escort guard companies were added. This month, 1 battalion of U.S. 23rd Regiment is made available for service there, and within a couple weeks, there should be like 9,000 US and South Korean personnel there, which is 6,000 fewer than were asked for. Now, there are plenty of nations within the UN that are hypersensitive as to the treatment of POWs here. Their representatives and the Red Cross, guys like that, are pretty good at regularly harassing POW command about POW rights and privileges. Of course, none of these agencies can enter North Korea to check on POWs there. The communists flat out refuse to grant access. So they're extra vigilant here, and because of this, 8th Army and Far East Command make it clear that force of any kind against POWs is prohibited, no matter the actions of the POWs. So there are agitators spreading their networks of control throughout the compounds day after day. This is not unknown to the American officers, but they can't do much about it. They don't really get any backing from Pusan or Van Fleet or Ridgway. There were certainly no appropriations for new compounds, new wires, or new construction materials. 80,000 potential tigers milled behind the flimsy, jerry-built wired pens that had been erected in early 1951. No better ones were ever built. Such requests were promptly rejected. One big reason so little concern was shown for the POW camps was that higher headquarters, with the start of truce talks, was convinced the war would end any day, automatically ending the POW problem by repatriation. I'll just say tensions are building and leave it at that for now. For with these few notes, the week is over. On November 6th, the UN gets the first real confirmation of Chinese pilots flying Soviet planes when fighters and medium bombers hit the island of Taihuado. And today, the 11th, is Armistice Day, and also is the day after the US Marines celebrate the Marines' birthday. And the 5th Marines replace the 1st Marines on the Minnesota line. I mention that because it is the largest helicopter lift of troops since the Marines began using helicopters in operations. And that is the week, with UN failure at Maryang-san, scattered actions in the skies, but a pretty quiet week in the field, and wheels within wheels within wheels at the peace talks in Panmunjom, and POW camps developing into political hotbeds. There are serious matters that really need to be straightened out on Geoje Island, but the commanders there know that by now in November, if any POWs get hurt, neither Van Fleet nor Ridgway will come to the aid of whoever is responsible. And so, by this time, there really is intense political fermentation going on. There are, as I said, both pro and anti-communist prisoners, becoming more and more divided and developing a serious hatred for each other, or I guess I should say, further developing. Many non-communists were forced into service in the Chinese and North Korean armies. They don't want to go back. And in many cases, they genuinely hate the rulers of the state they had to fight for. Maybe the armistice will be signed very soon, maybe next week, because at places like Geoje, it really seems like a powder keg is being stuffed with ever more powder. And if nobody does anything to prevent it, then one day a spark might blow the whole thing up. And should that ever happen, you will be able to follow the coverage right here, week by week. And for that, you can thank the Time Ghost Army, for that is who allows us to do all this. These are the newest commissioned officers, in the Army, and Stefan Nikolov is the Army Member of Week. And you too can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. This ice cream. Wow, we can have an ice cream truck. It's Korea. I'm in a battle studio. Like, doodly-doo, doodly-doo. It's like we're near the Donkey Kong factory. We just tell people that. Doodly-doo.